This week on The Wheelhouse. Civic engagement. What it means and how young people can get involved. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond, right here. I recently had the occasion to moderate a Connecticut Forum Encore conversation at the Hartford Public Library on the University of Connecticut's Hartford campus. The theme of the conversation was the future of civic engagement in Connecticut and was inspired by a recent Connecticut Forum event that featured former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg and journalist Jonah Goldberg. The conversation, recorded in front of a live audience, featured stakeholders on civic engagement here in Connecticut. And joining me today, the chief elections official in Connecticut, the Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. He is managing partner at a New Haven law firm called Fasano, Ippolito, and Lee. And he's former state Senate Republican President Tempore in the Connecticut General Assembly, Len Fasano. He is the Vice President of College Democrats of Connecticut, a junior at the University of Connecticut. Please give a very warm welcome to one of your colleagues here at the University of Connecticut, Ryan Engels. We are going to get right into the heart of the conversation because we want to make sure that we have enough time for content here today. We're going to start by talking about what we mean by civic engagement. When people hear civic engagement, they often think only of voting. So we're going to try to widen that lens. What does meaningful civic engagement look like to you beyond voting? Let's start with the Secretary.
For me, civic engagement is quite simply getting involved in your community. But I think too often people think of it as something political or strictly related to government and politics, but it's much broader. I'll stop there.
Senator.
So I think we lack a conversation where both sides are willing to listen. And that's what I think is missing among people in the communities. Your voice matters, but listening also matters. And that's where you need that combination. And I would argue in government, it is critical. Policy cannot be created unless there's substantive conversation and substantive listening to that conversation.
Let's hear from Ryan. What do you think about civic engagement?
You know, I certainly agree with everybody up here. I think the biggest thing for me on civic engagement is finding a cause that, means something to you. And I think if you can find a cause that means something to you and you can advocate for that, I think that's the biggest part.
Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about what you do? I understand that you're on a planning and zoning commission.
Yes.
And you also have a nonprofit that you're working on.
Yeah.
Just a little background on
of course. I wear a ton of different hats at the moment. As you know, I'm a student here at UConn, so I'm political science, as well as an MPA student here at UConn. Down in my hometown, I serve as a zoning commissioner for the Westbrook Zoning Commission, as well as the chair of the Town Sustainability Committee. And then around the state, I have the pleasure of serving as the executive director of the Connecticut Youth Political Advocacy Center, which is now a 100-plus member civic engagement organization that focuses on a ton of different initiatives. And then, as Frankie said, the vice president of College Democrats of Connecticut, which we do a ton of organizing work around the state. And we were super involved in the 2025 election. It was a great experience. So,
how is this changing for you, this definition of civic engagement over time? Go ahead, Len. You can start. Yeah, go.
Okay. I think there's been a dramatic negative change. When I was a senator at Capitol, I always felt free to talk to Senator Looney, who was my counterpart on the Democratic side, about any issue. And if we had policies that didn't work together, we were able always, in most of the cases, maybe 90% of the cases, work it out. We worked on a bipartisan budget in 2017-18, which still is working today for the most part. And literally, we cut the governor out, and for 9 months, every day except for weekends, we got together to talk about the budget. We felt the only way we can do that is talk about policy, because a budget reflects policy. So we got together, we talked about issues that were important to him and important to him and his caucus, me and my caucus, and we came together with a very strong bipartisan budget. But I see now a difference up there and among people, that my side is always right, your side's always wrong. You're the bad guy, I'm the good guy. And that's when you talk past each other. And that's when you lose, I think, the context of the issue. When I first got up there, I always thought one way, to be candid with you. When I got up there, I listened to my colleagues, and everybody's life is different. So everybody looks at an issue differently based upon their life experiences.
So I'm fairly new to elected office. Prior to this, I worked for the nonprofit sector, so I always considered myself civically engaged. I've volunteered all the time from high school, actually middle school, like all the way up till today. But it's only recently that I understand the connective tissue, if you will, between like civics, politics, and governance. For example, I think about when I was in my 20s, I was a member of the Junior League of Brooklyn, and one of my projects was to take women who were living in a domestic violence shelter out. One night a month, members of the Junior League would take them out, so they had like a pressure release, some fun, an evening away from their children, and we would like take them to a movie in a town far away or things like that. And it was great, and I thought, wow, I'm really engaged in my community, and I was. But looking back now, I realized, oh, I never thought to call my elected representatives to see if there were other resources that might be available that I didn't know about. I say, like, oh, wow, I bet you the legislature in the state was considering bills that might have provided more, like now there's a shortage of housing available to house domestic violence victims, survivors. So I realized, yes, it was great taking them out that one night a month, but I could have done a lot more to intersect my civic engagement with the way government functions. And I wish more people were aware of that holistic view.
You're talking about self-managing your role in civic engagement. I appreciate that. Leads me to my next question. Who gets to define what counts as civic engagement? Government, communities, maybe it's activists or individuals? What do you all think?
I think it belongs to the people. Like, we get to define it. I do think we, as a people, as a nation, I don't know, but I think we try to overly define some things, but civic engagement cannot be so easily put in a corner or labeled. There are people talking to their family members. That's a form of civic engagement. Picking up a piece of trash. I live by a stop sign. I'm always amazed how many people throw something out of their window. Don't do that. Picking it up out of the street, that's civic engagement. All the way up to someone like me running for office just because I saw something that I thought needed changing, and instead of pointing the finger over there, I thought, hey, maybe I'm the one I'm looking for, and I ran for office. So I think we all get to create what civic engagement looks like for us.
Same question for the senator, and think about it from this lens too. As you're the president of Senate Republicans in Connecticut, who are you interfacing with? Who are you involved with? Who are you liking to engage with as well?
So first, I agree with everything the Madam Secretary said relative to civic engagement. I think you define what you think your role is for civic engagement. From a legislative standpoint and being in politics, what I did as a leader is I would do a lot of reading of the news. I do a lot of reading of issues that I either see in print or listen to, and I find a wrong and try to figure out how to right it. It is, maybe correct it, instead not write it, but correct it. It is you read about someone who's had an issue. For instance, an issue that came up was if you got rushed to the hospital, into an emergency room, and there was a physician who was out of your network, that physician would care for you, but they can charge out-of-network pricing, which means your insurance company paid in-network, and you got hit with the above. So I called Senator Looney, and I said, Marty, look, we got to fix this. That's just wrong. I read about this person who got a huge bill, and it was called surprise billing. Several years ago, Marty and I corrected that. That no longer can you get surprise billing. And we worked it out that if it's someone out of network, and that's the only doc there, they have to agree to take it for in-network costs. That bill we made law with a bunch of others that we found as we looked into this issue. And now, nationwide, they have passed this relatively same language that Marty and I started 8 or 9 years ago. But that's what it does. You look for an issue that you think is common to a lot of people and you hear about, and you're the only one as a legislator who can change the law to correct the issue. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I called Marty because AMR charged this guy in Connecticut for a 6-mile hike, something like $3,000 because the AMR was out of network.
The ambulance, yeah.
The ambulance, right? And I said, Marty, we did it for the hospital. You got to think about, I'm out, so I can't do this. But you got to think about doing it for the ambulance. And he said, Len, that's a good idea. And I sent him the article. That's what I think it means when you're a legislator, you know what's going on, you look at the world, you try to find an answer. And, you know, when I retired, I debated whether to retire because there were a lot of issues on the table. But then you realize that as a legislator, there's just a conveyor belt of issues. They're never going to end. So waiting for the last issue is never going to happen. But so that's what I think from a legislative standpoint, what it means to be civic involved.
Martin Looney is a Democrat, so that's some bipartisanship. I wish we could elicit some sort of Pavlovian response from the crowd when we hear about bipartisanship. It's something that, yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes I say drink on the air when there's something that gets repeated a lot. But one theme that we'll need to keep hearkening back to if we hear it is bipartisanship, because we're just not seeing compromise at the federal level a lot. And that seems like something you're still trying to foster at the local level, even though you're not necessarily in the same seat anymore. Ryan, let's look at it from this perspective. You talked to us a little bit about what you're doing sort of statewide. Let's kind of hone in on what you could do at campus at the University of Connecticut. One metric might be, in terms of monitoring civic engagement, might be voting. Are you trying to get people to the polls at school? Or are you trying to get them interested in politics? What are you doing?
Yeah. So we want to get people to the polls, but we also really want to, get people involved in politics as well. The big thing that recently happened at UConn was we finally got a polling location for early voting in Mansfield, which is fantastic that students don't have to, walk this incredibly far distance or figure out a ride just to be able to vote, which was a huge step. Additionally, I think it's been a huge effort to try and get young people interested in a career in politics. I think one of the big things that people see when they open their phones is how negative politics can be, and it's hard to be like, yes, we would like you to get into politics, but this is what politics really looks like. And I think bringing back some civility to politics, bringing back conversations like this is really important to drawing young people into it. Because I think it's hard to look at politics sometimes and want to go for a career in it.
Secretary Thomas, you have anything to do with that voting location in Mansfield?
Yes. Early voting in general, and the location. I spend almost all of my time trying to separate the concepts of civics and politics, because what I have seen is that a lot of people are leaning away from politics, and I don't think we'll get them to lean back in until we focus on civics, right? Civics touches upon the civility that Senator Fasano talked about. Civics talks about Most people get comfortable running for office once they're comfortable engaging in the process. Ryan and I were talking earlier. He is currently serving on his zoning commission. I previously served on a zoning commission. I previously got involved in my town committee. And it was only through learning little things here and there that I ever ran for office. I was not a political science major like Ryan. I never thought I would get involved in politics. If you ask me now, I would still say I'm not a politician. I never got involved in politics. I got involved with government and trying to solve issues like Senator Fasano, and I'm in the executive branch because when I was in the legislative branch, I found I didn't like it. I think we have to all lean into civics, and that familiarity, I think, convinces people how to intersect and run for office.
There's something intentional about trying to separate politics and civics. You're doing it because you're an elected official trying to make sure that people engage. There's also the jelly roll quotient, which I've just learned about recently, where people might just say when they're asked about politics that they're a redneck and they might not need to pay attention to politics. So this is where I kind of want to lean in and talk to also the senator and Ryan about this, on that kind of intention that you might have, trying to get people involved, but maybe not trying to talk so much about politics or seeming like you're trying to influence someone. Senator, would you please go first?
Well, I think people's opinions should be unvarnished. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. If it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. You talk about it, how law becomes law. There was way back when used to be able to smoke in a restaurant, right? So there was a class from Orange, Connecticut that visited the Capitol, and it was a sixth grader who said they shouldn't allow people to smoke in restaurants. And the legislator said, hey, that's a good idea. And that became the law. So it doesn't matter where the idea comes from. It's your life, you're seeing it, you go throughout day by day doing different things, and you have different aspects of life. When you see something that should be corrected, you get a hold of your legislator and you say, this is wrong. It's not a Republican wrong or a Democrat wrong. It's just something that's wrong that needs to be fixed. That's why we're here, and that's why we serve. I think people sometimes focus, well, we got to push this Republican idea or we got to push this Democrat idea. And to me, a lot of those issues may be fringe issues because the issues that affect everybody's life day in and day out are everybody's issues, no matter what party you belong to. And I think that's what's important.
Can I step in with a follow-up question?
To me?
Yes.
Oh, wait.
As a senator, you probably had about 100,000 constituents. What percentage would you say in your career reached out to you with an idea?
Very small percentage.
Exactly.
Very small percentage.
We need more civic engagement to interact with legislators.
Ryan, the conversations that you're having with fellow young people regarding politics and how I guess you might phrase any kind of comments you have to fellow young people to make it maybe sound more
I think the thing
approachable?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the big thing is that young people are disillusioned by politics. You'll go on social media or watch the news, and everything you see seems to be the bad or the loudest voices. So I think the biggest thing that young people can do to kind of get past that is to look at their own communities. I think the biggest impact that young people can make is in their communities, is joining a local board, joining a local nonprofit, and really making an impact positively. I think young people think too much about how they can solve this massive national issue when they can solve these small issues at their local level. And I think that's something worth looking into.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to a conversation taped on the downtown Hartford campus of the University of Connecticut. It features Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas, former Republican State Senator Len Fasano, and Vice President of College Democrats in Connecticut, Ryan Engels. After the break, we'll talk to our panelists about intergenerational dialogue and how everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers can get civically engaged. There's more Wheelhouse after this break. You're listening to Connecticut Public. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we're talking about the future of civic engagement in Connecticut. You're listening to a conversation I moderated in Hartford that was put on by the UConn School of Public Policy and the Connecticut Forum. We spoke before a live audience with Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas, Len Fasano, a lawyer and the former Republican State Senate President, and Ryan Engels, a UConn student and Vice President of College Democrats in Connecticut. Listen now as we talk about how people from different generations are thinking about civic engagement. How do we measure if civic engagement is really working? That's a question I really want to pose to you first, Madam Secretary.
We don't measure it by voting turnout. I think a lot of people look at those numbers as a sign, but you can never compare two elections. It's never apples to apples because candidates are the largest driver of turnout. But I think you look at other metrics. We see studies from time to time about levels of trust in government. You know, civics is working when people trust institutions. Surveys about how you measure your own happiness. When people feel a sense of agency in their lives, government controls almost everything in our lives. So if you feel that sense of agency, that you can get things done and you're happier, that's a good metric. But also how responsive you feel government is in listening to you and providing for your needs. But I have to go back and touch upon one thing Ryan said as well, because I've heard from a lot of young people about this. Young people, by and large, think of issues like national issues or even statewide issues, but government is not structured that way. So if you care about climate change, for example, you have to know, do you want to intersect with the state level energy committee because it's something like that, or the transportation committee because you believe in electric vehicles, or your local committee or commission because you care about pesticides and local yards, or national federal policy because you care about global warming. So unless you know where to intersect in government, you often get frustrated and like you're just throwing your time into the wind, and that's where civic education comes in.
Len, can you just look at help us get the perspective of the generations? We looked at Ryan and we talked about younger generations, but help us understand how civic engagement is being looked at by the generations over time.
I feel like the younger generation lost faith and perhaps contact with government in terms of a policy, and connecting with government to change policy. Seems to me that there might be more disenfranchised of a younger generation and a disconnect, at least as I perceive it. And I think that they have to change that energy to a positive energy, and have conversations and understand that being upset about it doesn't make change, having input. And that doesn't mean protesting or I'm not going to vote or any of that stuff. It means having a conversation with their politicians to have a dialogue to effectuate change. And I don't know if the younger generation understands the importance of that. And I was going to ask Ryan. Actually.
Yeah, Ryan, are you seeing a lack of engagement among young people, or is it just that there's a sort of different engagement?
I think it's kind of a combination. I think, like I said before, young people are disillusioned by politics and civic engagement in general. But I think the biggest thing is making sure that we can communicate with each other just like we're humans again. I think social media has changed that, sometimes for the worse. I think sometimes young people really rely on social media for their engagement, and I think that kind of dehumanizes one another. I think we look at each other sometimes more like usernames when we're online, rather than having human-to-human conversations like you mentioned. So I think getting back to that, getting back to having conversations like this, bringing civic engagement into the daily conversation, I think is really important to getting back.
We talked about different ways that people are engaging. Secretary Thomas, thinking about those ways that you were talking about are different ways that people can engage and looking beyond just voter turnout. Are there ways that for older generations than a Gen Z or even a millennial that might feel more legitimate for people to engage through?
I think everyone has their preferences, and I hate hearing, there's always a lot of talk about the differences, but as I said earlier, civic engagement can really be anything, and civic education is needed equally applied across all ages. Our civic literacy is in the toilet. Usually I would give a civics quiz, but I'm not going to do that because Frankie will tell me I don't have time. I see older generations doing things like attending town meetings, showing up to testify in the legislature, writing letters to the editor, what I might call sort of traditional ways to engage, even protests, organizing protests, right? I see the younger generations sharing information more widely on social media, reaching out to other people on social media to bring them, or like WhatsApp or something, to bring them into a conversation. I see them volunteering on political campaigns. And they're all equally as valuable. I think what's missing is that the two cohorts think the other cohort is doing it wrong. But I would like to hearken back to every sort of major movement we've had in this country, from suffrage to civil rights to gay marriage, etc. It literally takes millions and millions and millions of people, decades, doing everything. There is no one size fits all. There's not one action that is more valuable. It's the conversation piece that fills in that gap to figure out how attending a town meeting and sharing something on social media can work together to further whatever outcome that you're trying to further.
I'll direct this next question to Ryan. Let's look at the trust factor here. How can trust in institutions shape participation?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. Obviously, I think trust can positively reinforce participation. I think especially young people, if they think that the systems and the government isn't responding to them, then why should I even participate? I think restoring that trust is the first step to really engaging young people in the process.
Any examples?
I would say making sure that politicians are accessible to their constituents. Sometimes it feels like it's hard to reach your politician or your representative. And I think making sure they're taking steps to become more accessible, whether it's holding office hours or responding to emails and messages quickly, I think that's the first step to making sure that people can actually trust who's representing them.
Considering trust, considering a bunch of different factors, Senator Fasano, where would you say our democracy is at right now? Do you think it's strong?
I mean, I think that there are people who have issues with the democracy, but I think it is working. I think it does work as a whole. You can find exceptions, but that's true in every situation, I believe. But I think people are questioning it, and that's okay. That's what we allow in this country, is to question democracy. But I think as a whole, it is working.
Secretary Thomas.
How much time do you have, Frankie?
I've got about a minute and a half. Can you do it in 90 seconds?
Yes. The number one question I started getting last year was, Secretary Thomas, is our democracy in danger? And I would always answer it with a question, and I would say, I don't know. What are you doing to protect it? And I echo that again today. We live in a republic, constitutional democracy, representative democracy, whatever you call it, but it relies on our active engagement. Yes, we elect people to represent us, but unless we engage with them, how will they know how to represent us? How will they know when they're doing a good job or a bad job? So I think our democracy is in trouble because too many people are stepping back from being active participants in it. And until we see that change, I think we will never fulfill the promise that we all think we're living in right now.
Let's hear from you on this one, Ryan.
Yeah, I would agree. I think our democracy is healthy at the moment, but I think those people stepping away and young people really stepping away is going to be a problem if it continues. I think we need to take further steps to really engage with young people and get them involved in these type of conversations. And if we can do that, I think we'll be in a good spot in the long run as long as young people are involved.
Is there any places that you guys see as real opportunities for sort of intergenerational collaboration?
I think the best opportunity we have for intergenerational collaboration is mentorship and internships. I know Secretary Thomas runs an excellent internship program in her office. I know IMRP does as well. I can testify to that. But I think internships and mentoring those interns are the best opportunities we have to make sure that they're engaged civically, engaged in their government, and really in any type of business.
I think mentorship for sure, but also encouragement. I think older people have a real opportunity to convince younger people, and I see some of my former interns here, to convince them that they have agency right now, that they don't have to wait. I mean, in my district, a few years back, there was a 22-year-old who ran for the Senate in Connecticut to replace someone who had served for 22 years, and he won. We have Ryan sitting on his zoning commission. Too often, we suffer from imposter syndrome, and we think we have to wait for something. And I think if we, with a little more gray hair, can let younger people know and maybe educate them on ways that they can have agency right now, I think we'll all be better served.
I think there's plenty of opportunity if people want to take it to get involved. You look at the town committees, your local town committees. I know the town committees I'm involved in my old district, the 34th, I think the average age is like 68. Not that that's old, but the average age is like 68. And there's not a lot of young people there. Now, maybe their lives are more hectic. Maybe their lives are more busy, and they haven't figured out if that is a place they want to put some time in. But I would suggest it is. Town committees is the epicenter, if you would, of people go into politics. Like Ryan.
Unless you're unaffiliated. Unless you're unaffiliated. That's true. But I think that's a place that you can plug into and start to get involved in your towns. And that's the quickest place you can make a change, and then to the state. But I don't see a lot of younger people getting on these committees and wanting to put that time in. It's your choice, but then it's tough not to put the time in and then complain later.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. That was one segment of our conversation on the future of civic engagement in Connecticut. It featured Stephanie Thomas, Len Fasano, and student Ryan Engels talking about intergenerational dialogue. After the break, we finish up by talking about things happening in 2026 in America that impact how each of us engage in civics. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we're listening to a conversation on the future of civic engagement. We taped this in front of a live audience in Hartford. It features Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas, former Republican State Senator Len Fasano, and a student from the University of Connecticut named Ryan Angles. Ryan, you're going to get this first cue here. Can you have civil discourse on campus?
Absolutely, you can. Just to plug College Democrats real quick, we're actually having a debate with the UConn College Republicans coming up this week, which is the perfect example of young people being able to engage with each other and have respectful conversations. So I can certainly attest to the fact that young people can engage in and are engaging in respectful and civil discourse.
Senator Fasano, there's been killings of American citizens this winter in Minneapolis, protesters rallying against federal law enforcement agents. The action, there's rhetoric there equating protesters to agitators. ICE spokespeople said a Connecticut protest that happened down the road from here at the Ribicoff Courthouse. Take the federal government's response to college protests of the Israel-Hamas war last year and answer me whether people should engage in protest or public debate. Can people still have that?
Well, I think people have an absolute right to protest, peacefully protest. I think that there are certain people on both sides who ramp up the anxiety and anger and tenseness. And once again, I go back that if there's a riot at a protest, that's what makes all the national news. And people kind of like that view because then it's highlighted. But I think that never really solves the issue. What solves the issue is civil conversation, in my view. You need the protest. You need to get your voices out. You need to have a stance. But violence and disrespectfulness of other people shouldn't happen. And if I just may for a second, nothing bothers, look, I might have fought with Governor Malloy. I might have fought with Governor Lamont, but I respected the chair. I respected that they were the governor, and you never cross that line. Business is business, but I used to joke with Governor Malloy, and I used to joke with Governor Lamont. I'd go to Governor Lamont's house and have wine with him and talk about issues. But, we have this debate, and that's okay to have the debate. But it's got to be civil debate, civil protest, and we can't ramp it up to violence because that gives each side a right to point to that violence and say, don't listen to them. Shut them off. They're no good. And that's what's falling apart right now, in my view.
Regarding civic engagement, Secretary Thomas, what can or should be said in public? This was a talking point after Charlie Kirk died. Is there a threshold for how far people can go in public political debate? Who gets to decide what that line is?
Again, I think every individual has to decide. We obviously have First Amendment rights, but I would like to think we live in a nation of human decency. And anyone who is willing to speak on an issue also has to be willing to listen on an issue. And we can always agree to disagree, even when sentiment is running high. And I think once we lose that civility, we're on a very dangerous path to losing this great American experiment.
Now we're going to take an occasion, because we think that this is part of civic engagement, to allow you all to ask questions right here in the fifth row. Would you say your name and town? I'd like your full name if you could.
Yes, my name is Chris McLaughlin. I'm from West Hartford.
Hi, Chris.
And I'm here mostly as the president, one of the presidents of the Greater Hartford League of Women Voters. And I'd like to put a little pitch in for our nonpartisanship. And we are, in connection with the 250th anniversary of our country, having a contest for high school students to write a why is civil engagement. They're actually doing a video on why civil engagement is important. So I think organizations like the League, we try to have debates with candidates. So it's a way to find out, and you don't have to take a side. And there are other organizations like Common Cause, the ACLU. What do you think about the importance of nonprofit organizations?
Nonprofits. Ryan, go ahead. Tell me what you're doing with a nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely. We run a ton of programs. They're mostly youth-oriented. So we've had an internship database, mentorship program, which was super impactful. We matched, I think, a couple of elected officials. I know, I think the secretary mentioned Will Haskell. We had him as a mentor in our program, which was great. So it's, I think, really important to run programs like that to really engage people in the process, because sometimes as a young person, you don't know where to start, or you don't know how to get involved. And I think having those avenues that really attract you rather than, just try and tell you what to do, I think are really important. So,
Secretary Thomas.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. The League of Women Voters does outstanding work around the country and in the state of Connecticut. But we've been also trying to push the message to other types of nonprofits and businesses. I used to own a business, and I know businesses are very interested in being parts of their community. And we are trying to, again, separate civics from politics, which usually rise up around election time, to convince all organizations to talk about civics all year round, because participating in government has very little to do with election cycles. So I wish other nonprofits would follow that example and try to integrate civics into everything they're doing.
Hi there, I'm Richard Sugarman. I'm the founding president of the Connecticut Forum, so I'm really glad to see everybody here. Ryan, I want to ask you a question. I want to give you a couple of minutes and maybe just challenge you a little bit. We've heard a lot about how young people are not involved in existing structures and existing town committees and so on. Can you school us on what we might be able to do to change some of those structures or change some of the ways that people are involved so that more young people are involved? School us a little bit on how we can help you be more engaged.
Yeah, I think the big thing is education. I think it always comes back to education, and really making sure that young people know there are infrastructure that can support them getting involved. I think a really key thing that was mentioned is town committees. I think I actually wish that local politics and maybe local government was something that I learned in school. I wish we had more classes that geared specifically towards the local infrastructure that could support young people getting involved in these spaces. So yeah, I would say education. I think wider ranging civic education in the classrooms would be a good idea to support youth civic engagement.
We have time for one more audience question. Oh, I saw an excited individual up here in the front row, the second row here. Could you get loud and proud for us here?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Smith. I'm a second-year MPP student at UConn. This is for a question for anybody on the panel. Outside of nonprofits and in your own communities, what are some ways that you engage with historically discouraged constituents?
It's difficult because they really don't reach out to us. But when I go to meetings, when I was state senator, I used to give my cell phone out publicly, and no one ever abused my cell phone. I mean, it'd be a room with 200 people, and I would give my cell phone out. No one's ever abused it. So I try to give them that right to do it in case they don't want to speak in public. Maybe they want to call me. But sometimes when I meet with neighborhood groups or people, the room will kind of clear out and there'll be somebody left who will then talk to me, and I try to encourage them to get involved, and I get them to my aide and have my aide flesh out the issues, and then I try to work with them that way. But it's hard unless they take that first step. I don't know who they are, right? So the way I would say it is I think it's incumbent upon an elected official to meet with groups, to be as accessible as possible during times that are convenient to people, and then try to find those who have an issue, who are shy or intimidated, and say, no, this is how you solve it, come with me. That's what I would suggest.
So when I took office, I'm fairly new to politics, but had been in the nonprofit sector for 30 years. So in that work, I came into contact with every conceivable type of person, issue, because I worked for a consulting company, so hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits. So when I took office as secretary, I really tried to remember two things. One, the kind of person I was before I knew anything about politics and how government operates, and who is generally missing. And it was very important to me that I go to people in their spaces, because I always felt that if I didn't reach out to government, I had no say. So we literally just made a list of different types of people, ages of people, regions of the state that we thought were underrepresented, and we proactively would reach out to groups. And then we would talk to one group and they would tell us about another. And in the last 3 years, we have built relationships with about 700 different organizations. We came up with ways that we thought were interesting to engage with people, like my Connect and Cut series. I have short hair. I used to go to barbershops all around the state and just like, hey, like, this is where people get their information about the community. What do you think about it? So we always try to get out to reach people and then teach them how they can reach the legislative branch, how they can have more agency. And I have to give a plug to our latest teaching tool, which is powerofcivics.ct.gov, a free online platform teaching people how to engage with local, state, and federal government.
This is the last question for our panel. What's a small but meaningful step anybody in the audience could take to be more civically engaged?
I'll give two, because one of them's for students and then one of them's for the older folks in the room. I would say for the older folks, mentor a student. It can be actually life-changing to have a good mentor, and I hope you can take some time to maybe meet some students here today and introduce yourself. And then for students, I would say join a youth advisory board, whatever that may be, whatever you're interested in. Spaces benefit from having youth voices in them.
So I would say that if you have a passion for something or an issue, contact your legislator and start to work on that issue. I think that that's the way you get to learn how government works, and you get to learn on how to get a bill to be a law, which is a long step. But if you feel something strong within you, don't think it's impossible. If a sixth grader in Orange could get a bill passed, you all can get whatever you think you need to see done.
Two things. powerofcivics.ct.gov. It is the gateway to everything else we've talked about. There is nothing that you can't do, and we are there to make it easily understandable and hopefully accessible. Everyone can do this. It's built for adults, but also young people. Everyone can do it. And another simple thing that everyone in this room should do right now before you leave, I'll be upset if you don't, follow the Office of the Secretary of the State at CTSOTS. CTSOTS. We put out a lot of helpful civic engagement information daily.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Frankie Graziano. That was a conversation on the future of civic engagement in Connecticut, featuring Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas, former Republican State Senator Len Fasano, and Vice President of College Democrats in Connecticut, Ryan Engels. We thank Jamie Daniel for her help in producing this conversation, and Amanda Zarinajad of the Connecticut Forum inviting us to this CT Forum Encore event. The show was edited by Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special thanks to Megan Boone and our operations staff for gathering this audio at the library in downtown Hartford. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.